Okay, so this lecture is on point of view, who's telling the story that you're reading, and is primarily the focus of chapter 9 in your book. With point of view, we're looking at what perspective, from whose perspective. Uh, and the reason we look at this is we have to consider in what way is the narrator restricted. So the narrator has greater freedom with certain points of views and lesser freedom but more benefits with other points of views, which is what we're going to discuss in this lecture. Now, one thing I want you to make sure that you're aware of, and this happens a lot with beginning creative writers, is confusing the narrator with the writer. The narrator should be considered even if the narrator is not literally in the story, is not a character in the story, should still be considered the character. It's just the narrator is not simply the writer writing down what the writer thinks. The writer is separate from the narrator, who the narrator created. So please try to keep that separation in mind when you're looking at point of view. Now, you have two primary, like I mentioned in the previous lecture, we really don't deal with second person. It's been done, but it's rare and it rarely, if ever, works. So what we normally see are just these two main points of view. The primary one being first person point of view, which is the I or the we. So it's told from an I viewpoint, or like in Faulkner's A Rose for Emily, told in a we point of view, which is in that story, it's the townspeople or the we. Uh, when it's this point of view, it's normally a major character or a protagonist. Many times the protagonist is the one that's narrating the story. Excuse me. When the story is being told about someone else, it can be a minor character. So it doesn't have to be a major character. You can have a minor character telling the entire story. Now, what you have to be careful of here, though, is that you can end up with an unreliable narrator. If any of you read The Great Gatsby in high school, where you realize at the end of the story that everything we've been told about The Great Gatsby by Nick Carraway needs to be taken with a grain of salt because he's an unreliable narrator. We really can't trust what Nick has to say. And so we always have to keep this in mind when we're looking at the narrator. Uh, this does allow, though, when you have an unreliable narrator, to see the irony in a narrator's view of the event, so the opposite of what we actually think is going on. Now, and this is probably is the most popular of narrations, is the third person. This is where we have a he, a she, or a they point of view. And here the narrator is not a character in the story. And there's three main categories of third-person narration. The one is, and the most difficult to actually pull off well, effectively, is omniscient. This allows the narrator to move in and out of the minds of all the characters. So we're able to hear the thoughts of every character and know everything that's going on. So it's also known as like the God view. Uh, that God can see and hear everything. So the omniscient narrator can see or hear anything. In this case, you cannot have an unreliable narrator. The narrator has to be reliable. The benefits of this is that uh, the story then can move around anywhere. You can be in New York City in the mind of one character, and in the next scene be in San Francisco in the mind of another character if they're characters within your story. And so your perception is not limited to what one character observes or feels. Also very difficult to pull off, though, as a writer. Now, this is probably more common, is the limited omniscient narrator, where we're only focusing on the experiences of a single character or just a few characters. So instead of knowing everything that's going on, we're limited in knowing just what's going on in a few characters' minds or only one character's mind and from that character's viewpoint. Uh, Now, what's good about the third person is we don't have the subjectivity, the naivete, or the self-deception of the first-person narrator. It's because, again, when you're going with first person, most people tend not to be that honest with themselves as to how they actually are. And so even if we have a reliable first person narrator, because we tend to lie to ourselves and see ourselves in a better light than we actually exist in, for the most part, then you do have this lack of subjectivity or objectivity, and you have subjectivity, and you have self-deception. All right, finally, the last that we have is the objective narrator. This I also mentioned, I think, in a previous lecture, the fly on the wall. So it's as if a fly was just watching the event, not making any commentary one way or the other, and just taking in events as they happen. Uh, the same way you'd watch a play or a movie, you're seeing the events within the story, within the plot. And so the narrator is just giving you the facts and can only recount the events and give the dialogue that actually occurs with no inside the head thinking at all.